It was February 25th, hot summer's day. I think it was about 30 degrees, and I was driving home from work. I was crossing the Waimak and I could see there was a lot of people swimming in the river. That always concerns me because people get caught in the currents between the bridges and run into trouble. Sure enough, just before tea time, the pages went off. I rang police comms to see what the event was, and it was a missing swimmer between the bridges. I jumped in and had a swim around, see if he was caught in some branches just under the surface. I wasn't prepared to go deeper. There's some interesting currents and eddies under there. I couldn't see any sign of him. We had to drive around again looking to see if there was anyone below the surface. There was no one that we could see. Obviously we couldn't see the bottom in the deepest holes. The chopper was hovering just below the bridge and they were looking in the water. They couldn't see anything. Coast Guard, IRB, the Rangiora High Rescue was driving around looking, and we had Kaiapoi 1 sitting downstream doing what we call a barrier search, driving backwards and forwards, so if an item of interest was to float downstream, they'd find it. They saw nothing. There was no sign on the surface, so it wasn't looking good. And I spent some time talking to the boy's family, found out a little bit about him. He was a pretty good sportsman, he had a girlfriend. Police stood us down for the night as it was getting too dark to search. Turned up at sunrise and awaited the police dive squad. We put them in the river, they set up their search lines, and on their first sweep they found the boy. We then lifted the boy into the boat, and at that point I realised just how young this boy was. He was just a good-looking boy that was dead, and it upset me. It's a moment that sticks with me. The father, he was a broken man. He'd had a hard life. He'd chucked that all away in order to give his son a good life, not grow up the way he grew up. And I remember him pulling the blanket over his head and just tucking it in around his head, gently. It was the last thing he could do for his son. And yeah, I was standing there with tears streaming down my face. It was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. My wife rang me and said, are you going to come home soon? I was like, yeah, I'll be home soon. You know, I'm going into labour. I made my way home and we shot off to the hospital, and later that night, my son Alexander was born. To go from giving parents their son's body, a boy the same age as the people I was teaching daily, he could have been one of my students, to being in the hospital room and catching my son and cutting the cord and introducing my son to my wife. I was excited but scared. Didn't know what was going to happen. Start of a new journey. Great way to finish off what we'd just done. Tell your kids you love them. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah, so they need to know.